What up, Sims? We're about 2 months out from the release of MH3, and I just wanted to do a top 15 list of cards I have found really useful that you guys may have missed, or if you saw them, you thought they were only for certain strategies, but I think they could find space in others as well. So without further ado, these are the top 15 MH3 cards you are not playing but should be. First card I want to talk about is Amphibian Downpour. This is a 3 mana aura with Flash and Storm, which is pretty crazy, and it enchants a creature and turns that creature into a 1/1 frog without any abilities. So, this is very useful for Enchantress strategies with Constellation. It's also really good at just shutting down commanders. You can play it at instant speed, so if your opponent has cast 2 spells, you cast this, you'll get 2 more copies, and you can just turn off all 3 of your opponent's commanders for 3 mana, which is very powerful. But beyond that, if you are playing a is it token strategy and you play Brutaclad in your deck, this card is crazy. It's similar to Asinine Antics in the way that it can turn off certain things and give you time to set up your Brutaclad, and then once Brutaclad comes down, you can turn all of these interaction pieces into powerful tokens and just win the game with them. So if you're running a deck with Brutaclad in it, definitely give Amphibian Downpour a second look. The second card I want to talk about is Arcbound Condor. This card is an insane piece of interaction for any black artifact token based deck. I'm talking Imhotep, I'm talking food if you're playing Frodo or Sam, I'm talking treasure if you're playing Prosper or Jury. This guy will just clear your opponent's board of creatures. It's gonna be nuts. You land this, it's kind of like a Mayhem Devil that can deal with indestructible creatures. This thing is nutty. Definitely throw it into any artifact based black token decks if you're running one of those. Card number 3, I want to talk about Brain Surge. This is like a little brainstorm type thing, but if you're doing anything that relies on setting up the top of your deck or wants to put cards from your hand on top of your deck to set up like Cascade or Discover or anything like that, this is a really slept on card. Brain Surge is better card advantage than the Brainstorm. Of course, it's 2 more mana, but it does actually net you card advantage, so that's really good. And it just lets you set up the top of your library for Cascades. So I'm looking like Maelstrom Wanderer, I'm looking at like Elsha, anything that cares about the top of your library. Don't sleep on Brain Surge. The fourth card I want to talk about is Chittering Dispatcher. Now, you may think this is just an Eldrazi card, but I promise you it is not. I'm thinking about this card for token decks and token doubler decks. With token doubling and Myriad, when you attack with this guy, you'll make 2 more copies, and then when those copies leave the battlefield, you will make 2 more spawns for each of those copies. So I'm thinking like in Adrix and Nev, if you can curve this guy into Adrix and Nev, attack with this guy, you make 4 myriad copies of them, then those 4 myriad copies leave, and you get 8 Eldrazi spawns to set up for your huge next turn 5 with your commander in play. Yeah, that is gonna be insane. Definitely consider this guy for like Ajax and Nev. Also seems really good in Azuri Claw of Progress, where you can be netting 4 experience counters a turn. Super strong there. Definitely don't sleep on this Chittering Dispatcher as like a ramp engine and experience generator slash token maker. Really solid and slept on card. Card number 5 I want to talk about is Collective Resistance. This card is just so good. Any green heavy deck should be playing this card, in my opinion. It can be a slightly overcosted Tameo Safekeeping for 2 mana, but then you can also have this artifact and enchantment removal. And if you just pay 4 mana, you get all 3 of those modes. 3 mana, you get to remove an artifact and enchantment at instant speed. That's just an amazing rate for these kind of effects. Every single mode on this is good, and being able to escalate it is really powerful. Now, remember, escalate is not quite like Spree. You do at least get 1 mode without having to pay any escalate, so it's better than Spree. You pay this for 2 mana, you still get 1 mode at least. 3 mana, you get 2. 4 mana, you get all 3. It's super powerful. Definitely should be seeing play in like almost any green heavy deck in my opinion. Card number 6 is Copied Land. I think pretty much every mono blue deck should be playing this card. It's just land ramp in blue. It looks a little funny, but that's essentially what it is. You can copy the best land on the battlefield if someone has like Dowsing Dagger in your meta. Anything like that, this can just copy the best land on the battlefield for 3 mana. It's land ramp in blue, that's super hard to find. It triggers any Enchantress synergies you have, so if you're in Bant or Azorius Enchantress, it's super powerful there. And it doesn't get wiped by any destroy all non-land permanents. It doesn't get bounced by Cyclonic Rift or anything like that. It's just a really solid piece of ramp in blue, which you don't get that often. So definitely pick one of these up if you can, if you're trying to play mono blue. Card number 7 is Eldritch Immunity. If you're a deck that can consistently create colorless mana, maybe you're like a one color deck and you play a lot of utility lands, or you're an artifact based deck, this card is nuts. It's a 1 mana protection spell for whatever your most important creature is on the battlefield, or you can overload it and basically just give all your creatures unblockable. It's always good to have ways to break through board stalls in Commander, and this is one that doubles as a protection piece for whatever your best creature is. That seems awesome to me. I definitely think any deck that can consistently produce colorless mana, you should at least be looking at this card for sure. Keep it in mind. It's not just for Eldrazi decks. It's really powerful. It's just a great card. Card number 8 is Glaring Fleshraker, another colorless card. Again, you have to be able to produce colorless mana to play this, but this card is really nutty when you think about it. They basically took a colorless spell cost reducer and a colorless spell pinger and they shoved it into the same body for 3 mana. That's ridiculous. My friend recently just slotted this into his Elsha deck. It's a Sensei's Divining Top combo deck, and it puts in work there because it fills 2 roles in his combo. It's both a cost reducer and a win con as he's doing his combo. It pings the whole table to death, just kills everybody. If you're playing any kind of like artifact deck that can consistently produce colorless mana, this is gonna just be better than one of those cost reducers. Card number 9, Glimpse the Impossible. This card is amazing, guys. It is so good. It's not just for impulse draw decks, I swear. Like, this is just solid card advantage. This is a miniature Jessica's Will. This is like it's not as good as Jessica's Will, but like that's not saying much. Jessica's Will is one of the most busted cards we've gotten in the past few years. Like, but this card does a really good imitation of Jessica's Will, and it's way cheaper to pick up. Definitely be slotting this into your red decks. One of the best things about this is that the cards that you exile that you can't play just get put into your graveyard. So if you're playing any kind of like big red reanimator deck, something like Olivia Crimson Bride, any kind of like Doretti style deck. I think this card is really solid in those because it'll ramp you for 3 and mill you for 3. That's just good. Even if you aren't playing any of the spells that you have exiled, it's just going to ramp you for 3 and mill you for 3. That is amazing in big red reanimator decks. And on top of that, if you do have the mana and you want to play one of those spells, you can do that. It's just super flexible, it's super powerful, and it's dirt cheap. Definitely pick up this card and slot it into your decks. It will perform super well, I promise. Card number 10 is Indebted Spirit. This guy is either 1 mana for 2 bodies or 3 mana for 3 bodies. That is just an amazing rate for Aristocrat decks. Any kind of white-based Aristocrat deck, I think you should take a look at this card. It's dirt cheap right now. I'm sure it will always be dirt cheap, but this is a really solid one. It's also an enchantment, so if you're doing any kind of enchantment strategy, it's really solid there. It just makes a lot of chump blockers for you. It gives afterlife to whatever you enchant. It has afterlife itself. It's just a really flexible card. It's great on turn 1. It's great on turn 3. Tesa decks, I think this is so cracked in a Tesa deck. It's so many bodies for such cheap investment. It's really solid. Definitely look at this if you're in a white-based aristocrat or token deck even. Card number 11 I want to shout out is Lazotep Quarry. This is just another land that is also a sacrifice outlet. If you're playing High Market or you're playing Phyrexian Tower in your deck, this should be also probably in your deck. Any aristocrat deck, you need sack outlets. You need to be able to, especially instant speed ones are super powerful. This is just another one of those that you can play on a land. Super easy to do. And then late game, it also can just reanimate something. And if you're in a token strategy and you have token doublers, you can get 2 copies of those. It's just a really powerful card if you're doing any kind of like graveyardy deck that wants to be able to sacrifice your creatures. Pick up a Lazotep quarry. It's about 230 on TCG. Pretty cheap. I'm sure it will only go up over time. So definitely if you want sacrifice outlets, pick up this card while you can. Card number 12 is Muster the Departed. This card is pretty nuts, guys. If you're doing any kind of enchantment animation type thing, I'm talking like Onyxia especially, really looking at this for Onyxia. This is just ridiculous. You need to be able to trigger Morbid, so you need to be playing sack outlets. But this card can do that thing where if you can turn this into a creature, it can just, or a creature token, like with Onyxia, you can just start populating itself over and over and over. And that's always a really powerful effect. We've seen it with Three Blind Mice. We've seen it with that other caretaker's talent, I think. So yeah, just a really powerful effect. It makes a 1/1 flying blocker when it comes in that you can also always populate that while you're waiting to animate this thing. But if you can turn this into a creature token with Onyxia, this is gonna put in a ton of work. Or if you're just making really powerful creature tokens in general, this is a good one. I would consider it for like Satya even. Seems really solid there. So keep an eye on this card. Don't forget about it. Card number 13 I want to talk about is Proud pack-rhino. I think this card is really solid for any kind of like flicker based deck. Being able to load up shield counters on your important pieces. Looking at like Emil, I'm looking at Brago. Uh, it seems really good there to just be able to protect your commanders. Your commanders are usually really important in those style of decks. They kind of just facilitate your whole strategy, and without your commanders, you aren't able to flicker and get value. So being able to consistently put shield counters on your commander seems really important in those kind of decks. I think it's pretty slept on. And especially in a meal where you're doing +1/+1 counter stuff, probably the proliferate's really good as well. So I think this card should definitely be considered for any kind of flicker based deck where you can repeatedly use that ETB, and putting shield counters on all your things is going to be good board protection, especially if you can do it at instant speed. Card number 14 I want to talk about is Pyrogoyf. Now, this card is really fun to use in Vintage Cube if you guys play that, but this card is just really, really good if you are making a bunch of copies of one creature. It doesn't have to be a graveyard deck. You do not need to be playing mill for this card to be good. People are gonna just be putting cards in their graveyard throughout the game. It's inevitable. There's always gonna be a creature, enchantment, sorcery, probably land, fetch lands, it counts everyone's graveyard. It looks at everyone's graveyard, so it's always going to be pretty big. And if you can just copy this guy over and over and over, they're all going to see each other. It's like copying Terror of the Peaks. It just gets out of hand. You can just literally kill a whole table. I recently slotted it into my Riku deck. It's been feeling really good there. If you're playing like Calamity or Jaxis or any Rionia, any of these red copy creature spells type guys, slot a Pyrogoyf in. It's only 70 cents. They're really cheap to pick up. It's really powerful. Being able to copy them over and over, you're just going to be dealing hundreds of damage to the table. It's gonna be ridiculous, I promise. And our final card, number 15, I want to talk about Quest for the Necropolis. This card, especially for Muldrotha, where you want to be able to have cheap permanents of each type that you can recur each turn. This card is great for any kind of like self-mill landfall deck, like Lord Windgrace, stuff like that. This card is going to be putting in a lot of work. It's just going to be a really good kind of reanimation engine for you. So you can pay a black and then get a few landfall triggers and then later cash it in, bring back something really big. This just seems really solid, like as a great engine for anything that can recur enchantments, especially you don't need to be a landfall deck, but if you just have some fetch lands in your deck, uh, or maybe you're green at least, so you have ramp spells, you're gonna reduce that cost really quickly. It's gonna be cheap to get back your really big bombs, especially if you're self-milling. Just seems like a really solid card, especially for Muldrotha. I know everything's good in Muldrotha, but I think this one stands above your other enchantment options for sure. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for the 15 cards you probably missed from MH3. Let me know what other goodies you guys have found in the comments down below, and remember to like and subscribe to my OnlyLands for the spiciest deck content on the internet. Thank you guys again, and I'll see you next time. Peace!
Walking down the street, everybody looking at me.